Godspell was a favorite of mine because Harvey Cox wrote a book called Feast of Fools that kind of inspired Godspell. And I did my senior thesis in college on the Feast of Fools. So, yeah, I love it. I love it. So here we are. And I got to say that the first part of this pericope is just absolutely wonderful. And you can tell I love it because of the way I ended the commissioning every Sunday. There's a second piece about the law. Well, I'm going to get to that. But I just got to say, it doesn't matter how many theologians you consult, how many commentaries you read. The truth is that nobody knows much of what's being said there, except there is one piece that I think we really need to hold on to. Recognizing our limits. I get so tired of sports people and life coach gurus who are always saying, you know, you just got to give 110%, 150%. You just got to, there's no limits to what you can do. This morning I'm here to say that what's really important in life, especially on our spiritual journeys, is we have to recognize our limits. That's what's crucial. I thought as I was preparing for this sermon about August football practice, and even in the mountains, it wasn't pleasant. And if you played line, as I did, because I was sizable, another word for fat, go ahead and say it. I always had this real thing, just kind of a resentment toward the backs. You know, the halfbacks, the quarterback, we even had a fullback in those days. And then there were the safeties and the cornerbacks. They always showed up for training, kind of svelte. And they just had this look about them. I didn't necessarily resent them because we got our brains beat in down in the line, and they got all the glory. I didn't resent them that they got the big plays and nobody ever actually noticed we were on the field. We were just below the band at halftime. I didn't even resent them because they got all the good-looking cheerleaders. There's only so much you could hope for in life. I resented them because it seemed to me that when they came to August preparation time, they never seemed to suffer like the rest of us. And it was suffering. That first practice, no matter how much you tried to prepare, was just awful. Now remember, as far as I can tell, there's only two kinds of people in the world who actually get paid to abuse and bully people: drill instructors in the military and middle school football coaches who teach driver's education on the side. And they can make life pretty miserable. And one in particular made my life really, really miserable. Mr. DeWeese. We had names for our two middle school football coaches, Mr. DeWeese and Mr. Swift, Coach DeWeese and Coach Swift. Coach Swift had this certain look, and so he was known affectionately as Porky Pig. Not to his face, though. Mr. DeWeese taught driver's education, was known as Chrome Dome DeWeese. I don't think I need to go further on explaining that. But I remember he would yell, and the push-ups that we had to do, and no matter how I tried, they never seemed to appreciate that I was pushing up more than the quarterback. Pushing you to your limits was the thing. And I remember after a few days of practice, I was so sore in my chest and arms that I couldn't really carry my school books. It was just painful to do anything. And yet they persisted and they pushed and they pressed. And I remember one day in particular, running, I'd kind of lost everything I'd eaten while I had to run, and they were yelling at me, and I got back, and the push-up started, and he says, "Okay, I want 5 more." And he stood over me, and he said, "Come on, you fat, worthless Middleton, give me 5 more." And I'm straining, and finally I got 2 out, and finally I crumpled. I knew he was hoping to weed me out. I crumpled, and I said, "I can't." Oh my, that was so painful to admit. When somebody's standing over you, looking down at you in disdain. I survived that training camp, but I learned from that. So by the time I got to high school, I went out for the mascot where I could ride the cheerleaders up and down the field on my shoulder. I didn't have to train for that. Recognizing our limits is difficult. It is hard. I remember another occasion when I was trying to break into campus ministry and seminary, and I started a Baptist student union on a little campus of a little college, United Methodist College, and we built a pretty good program, and there was a basketball tournament that the state people thought would be good for camaraderie. And they divided the east part of the state from the west, and I got together 6 players. And so we went down to this little Baptist college, and we didn't figure that we'd do anything but have a good time. And so the first school we got was like Pembroke State, now known as UNC Pembroke. You probably see the signs if you're on your way north on 95. And because they were an easy pick, I could hardly believe that 6 of us Friday night won a game. And we were sore and pathetic, but it was satisfying. Well, we've accomplished something. The only problem was the next morning at 10 o'clock, we had to play this team, North Carolina State. And, well, they were the Baptist student people, you know, but my seminary friend Tom Flint was the coach, and he had played at the University of Arkansas and thought he should get to play on the team. And so everybody said, well, you know, they're kind of hog fodder. And imagine my surprise at the end of the game when somebody tossed in a basket from way out almost at the line, and we won by 1 point. And then there was the Eastern Division Championship game, which had to be played at 3 o'clock. Now, get that? We had college affiliate. We played 2 full games with 6 people, and then we get to play the host school team. One guy was as bad as I was. The other 4 were decent. And so we were cramping so badly, and imagine we got to the last minute, and they said, you know, Ed, you need to go in. We at least need your size to block out. I could clear. And I said, oh, I can't. I was cramping so badly. We all were, but I was hurting. The other guy, he was hurting too. And so I said, well, let's let Steve go in. But when I looked around, Steve had gone outdoors to take a smoke. So I stood there that last minute on the court, seizing up. I could barely stand. And I was shocked when the last shot was ours, which could have won the Eastern title, and we lost. And we were not disappointed going to the showers. We were just delighted to have whatever over, because all of us had come to that point where we could not play another minute. We had limits. No athletic guru, no television person selling something. Nobody could have made us take one more step on a basketball court. Sometimes you can't. Today's gospel, Jesus starts out with those wonderful challenges and that wonderful picture, if you will, of those following being light and being salt. And for me, those words challenge me and they make me feel inspired, because somehow I feel that I can be light. I can keep my light going even if it burns low sometimes. And I get that sometimes I can even season people's lives, and I'm grateful for that. That's all doable. And then Jesus goes off on this piece, and a wise clergy person, while we almost never are wise, a wise clergy person preaching this text just has to look at the congregation honestly and say, I'm not sure completely what Jesus was saying. He's fulfilling the law, but none's going to pass away. And unless you exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, let me paint you that picture. 613 specific laws were expected to be kept. And those who were the most righteous, who were the hopes for Israel, did everything within their being never to let down the side by missing those 613 ritualistic laws. And when I think of that admonition, it causes me to stop as the day doing push-ups and the day walking from the basketball court, and I have to look into the face of the holy and say, I can't do that. I simply can't. But what's worse is I have to pretty much say, when I look at those 613, I won't. Because I sometimes feel that it's such a hopeless cause. And it's in that moment that the whole of the New Testament teaching lights up. Because here's the truth. We really don't have to. We are expected to do good, but our relationship with God isn't dependent upon how much good or how many rules we can pull off at any given day in order to be light or salt. It's when I ponder the richness of God's grace as manifested in you that I realize I'm not alone on that fall football field or in that stinking gymnasium. That I don't have to be dependent simply for my efforts and my work, because I am a part of community. And when we sit together, that's when we feel it and we know that God abides within us and we are part of God's body, always light and always salt. We are a community where we experience God's presence through water and our baptisms, through word and song and sermon and prayers, through times when we meet at the table and we break bread and we take it and we remember that Jesus loves us always. And I even know it at strange times, as a few weeks ago when we sat over in Sponsor Hall around the table and voted on business stuff. And when the meeting was over, I sat there because I'd never quite felt community in a church business meeting. When we hear Jesus saying to the disciples admonitions about being light and charging them to be salt, and then saying, oh, you got to do it all, even as Jesus is kind of grinning on the side and saying, but I know you can't. I'm going to take care of this for you. That's when we know that not only do we have limitations, but God knows we have limitations. It is willing to step in and give us what we need, rather than yelling useless phrases at us about getting up and getting on. This is when we recognize that because we can't, God will. Because we can't, God will. Wished I'd have known that back in high school. I wish I'd known that in college when I was trying not to flunk out. I wished I'd known that in seminary or in any of the churches I've served where I really thought I had to do it all or God's realm would come to an end. It's about you, the community, the Spirit, and the work that Christ has done so that we know the love of God in Christ Jesus. And we know who we are and the work that is ours. Thanks be to God for grace, for light, and the call to be salt.